So my name is Dave and I'm the Chief Futurist for Cisco. And what I'd like to do today is, as a networking company, we often talk about what we make. I want to talk about what we make possible. And it's not about the facts and figures that I'm going to share with you today. It's about taking away the time that we are living in. We are living in exponential times. And in fact, human knowledge is doubling at pretty exponential rates, and enabled largely in part due to the internet, due to connectivity. And it's changing so fast that in 50 years, 95% of everything we know across all disciplines, whether that's medicine, physical materials, physics, in 50 years, 95% of everything we know as a species will be discovered in those 50 years. We are indeed living in exponential times. Some of you may know Ray Kurzweil. He is an American inventor, futurist, author, and he has postulated that the century that we're in now will be equivalent to 20,000 years of progress at today's rate. We will do more in the next 80 to 90 years than we have done in all of human history combined. So we're indeed living in exponential times. Now let's talk about some of the trends that we're seeing, and then I'll talk about some of the implications of some of these trends and what it means to us as a society. So the first is the Internet of Things. And it should be no surprise that the World Wide Web has gone through four fairly distinct phases. We've gone from sort of academia to brochureware to the transaction web, and now obviously social networking. We call it Web 2.0. Really should be called Web 4.0, but we're in sort of Web 2.0, the fourth phase of the web. But the internet itself arguably has not fundamentally changed over the last few decades. Now you may say, well, hang on a second, there's more devices connected. That's true. But the topology hasn't fundamentally changed. Yes, we've standardized on IP, Internet Protocol, but it has historically been a network by people and for people. That's about to change. The network of tomorrow is a network of things, not a network of people. And that has fundamental opportunities as we think about the network going forward. So one way to think about the Internet of Things is when there's simply more things connected to the network than there are people. What does that mean to you when your car is connected to the network, your home's connected to the network, your clothes are connected to the network? What happens when things start following you on Twitter or Facebook? When things start talking to other things? What does that do in terms of benefit to humanity? And we'll talk about some of those trends today. Today there's roughly about 10 billion things connected to the network. And there's only about 2 billion people connected to the network. So already there's 5 times as many things on the network as there are people. And we see this number exploding to about roughly 25 to 50 billion things in the next decade, with about 3.5 billion internet users by 2016. So a lot of things and a lot of people connecting to the network. And it's not a simple curve. What we're seeing is that the Internet of Things has come in waves, 3 fairly distinct waves. Wave 1 was when you went to the device, you went to the computing resource. Wave 2, which is sort of where we're ending now, is where the device comes with you, the BYOD phase, and these waves overlap one another so that one does not discretely end and the next begin. But the technology comes with you, the device comes with you. We're now entering a very different phase, Internet of Things, the Internet of Everything, where everything is going to be connected to the network, and everything on the planet is going to be sensed. Now, 50 billion could be just the beginning. Some of the trends that we're seeing: tiny, tiny computers, not much bigger than a millimeter in size, with a processor, with memory, with solar, so they can self-power. Tiny cameras, where the camera is not much bigger than the head of a hypodermic needle. And tiny sensors, where thousands of them can fit on the tip of your finger. As you start to combine these things, what we're seeing are billions of devices that will be inside us, in our environment, around the world, sensing our planet, sensing everything we do. Huge implications from a healthcare perspective and just transparency of what's going on around the globe. So 50 billion could just be the beginning. All of these devices are getting connected through broadband wireless speeds. In January of this year alone, the UN passed a resolution to support 100 megabits per second to a handset device. And just to give you a sense of how fast it's changing, so this is an iPhone 5 that I just picked up. And my network connection at my home in California has a 50 megabit connection. It's a pretty fast connection, 50 megabits. And just before I left, I tested the network speed on this device. It's about 55 megabits. This device in my hand has greater broadband connectivity than my entire home does in California. This device has more broadband coverage than most countries had a few decades ago. So that's sort of the path that we're on. So the network speeds are getting very fast, and we're all getting connected through wireless and wired connectivity. And we're also seeing all sorts of interesting devices getting connected to the network that we didn't expect to get connected to the network. So just a few examples. In Brussels, there's a tree that is laden with sensors and cameras, and this tree tweets. And this tree has more than 4,000 Twitter followers. How many people in this room have more than 4,000 Twitter followers? There's a tree that has more than most of us. There's a Dutch company called Sparked that is connecting sensors to cows, to livestock, to track pedigree and behavior. And each cow is generating 200 megabytes of information per year. We're seeing clothing and shoes, medical devices like asthma inhalers that can cross-reference their location based on weather conditions. We're seeing light bulbs where each individual light bulb has a unique IP address. So imagine the implications perhaps for someone that is hearing impaired if their light bulb's flashing to let them know of some situation. This is a light bulb, for example, that changes color based on condition. So imagine the light turning green when your stock portfolio is going up and turning red when your stock portfolio is going down. There's a company called Proteus that is attaching chips to pills, and as you swallow the pill, the stomach acid in your body activates the chip, which in turn broadcasts to a Band-Aid on your stomach, which in turn broadcasts to your mobile phone to let your physician know that you've taken the pill. So think about the implications for healthcare. You know, there are not enough professionals in the healthcare field to keep up with the aging population and the population boom. So we need more and more creative ways to manage some of these healthcare challenges, and connectivity is a huge enabler for that. And from an infrastructure perspective, you know, it's no surprise that people are moving into cities. And within the next few decades, 75% of the population will live in cities. And the number of cars on the road is growing at a pretty rapid rate. Today, there's between 800 million and 1 billion cars on the road. And within another 3 to 4 decades, we'll see about 4 billion cars on the road. The infrastructure as it stands today cannot accommodate that type of load. By automating cars, by connecting cars to the network, and by connecting cars to the infrastructure, we can triple the capacity on the motorways. The devices on the network today communicate using Internet Protocol version 4. And IPv4 gives us about 4 billion addresses. And as I mentioned earlier, we already have 10 billion devices connected to the network. We've run out of IP addresses. The industry is moving to IPv6 over the next decade or so to accommodate this insatiable demand for connectivity. With IPv6, every one of you in this room could have 52,000 trillion devices each. Every atom on the surface of the planet could have 100 addresses per atom. Plenty of addresses to go around with IPv6. And we will indeed connect billions upon billions of devices to the network, so we'll use these addresses. So why do we care? I mean, why is any of this important? Why do we care that we're connecting everything? Well, historically, we have been gifted with our 5 senses: sight, hearing, taste, and so on. Arguably, in many ways, this Internet of Things phenomenon is a way to sense our world in completely different ways. We get insight into things that we could not gain insight into before, climate change, for example. And as we create more and more data over the coming decades, and we learn to take that information, or that data turn into information and knowledge and wisdom, the benefit to humanity is profound. As a catalyst for transparency, connectivity is a tremendous tool. Now, all of these things, all of these devices that I talked about, are creating a lot of information, a lot of data, a lot of content. And by way of example, in 2008, we created 5 exabytes of new information. 5 exabytes is a lot of data, it's a lot of information. We created more new data in 1 year than we did in all of human history. But by the end of 2013, we will create 5 exabytes of data every 10 minutes. That's the path that we're on in terms of data creation. Now, 5 exabytes seems like a tremendous amount of data, But if you fast forward 3 years, we are generating 1.3 zettabytes of information. To put that in perspective, because that's a hard number to wrap our brains around, 1 zettabyte of information, if you could build a bookshelf from Earth to Pluto 20 times, a 72 billion mile long bookshelf, that's how much data we're creating on an annualized basis. Next year, that number will double yet again. So we're creating a lot of content. Where's it all coming from? So, email, 200 billion email messages a day. I get about half of those, by the way, and they're spam. But 200 billion email messages a day. YouTube, 60 hours of video uploaded every single minute. When I researched this statistic, when I first put that number together, a year ago, that number was not 60, it was 20. A year ago, it was 20 hours of video a minute. Today, it's 60 hours of video a minute. That's just YouTube. Facebook, 140 billion photos. Home to 10 billion photos a month are added. That's every person on the planet uploading a photo or two every month. By 2015, 1 million video minutes will traverse the network every single second. So you can see we're creating a lot of data. And what's interesting is we store a tremendous amount of this data. Think about when you go on holiday, when you go on vacation, you take your digital camera with you, and you take hundreds or thousands of digital pictures with the good intention that when you come home, you'll delete the bad ones. You don't. You keep them all. We have become digital pack rats. We're storing 92% of all the information that we come across. And the devices themselves, we're seeing more and more screens, devices with an insatiable desire to create and consume rich media. So whether it's things like telepresence, whether it's flexible displays, flexible OLED displays, transparent displays, so glass windows are now starting to double as displays, even mirrors that double as displays. There are mirrors now that you can look into. They can do pupil dilation checking, they can check skin color, they can get blood pressure, pulse rate. That may be your first level physician of tomorrow, your bathroom mirror. So every surface is becoming an interactive display, and these things are creating a lot of data, and the data itself is getting fatter. So take medical scans as one example. A few years ago, a medical scan, like an MRI scan, a CAT scan, might have been a few megabytes in size. Today, medical scans are many terabytes in size because they're three-dimensional, they're much higher density. We're moving from megapixel to gigapixel to terapixel images. Data is flowing across the network in unprecedented ways. Now, the great news is, with all of this data, as we learn to mine it, I may be out of a job. What we're seeing is the ability to now predict outcome based on a large corpus of information. So I'll just use one example to illustrate the trend, and this is just early signals that gives you a sense of where we're going. So in the United States, there's a retail store called Target, and based on the shopping habits of a girl, Target was able to deduce that that girl was pregnant and sent a notification to her parents, to the family, congratulating the daughter on her impending pregnancy, unbeknownst to the parents that the daughter was pregnant, which was a bit of a surprise to the parents, of course. And not only could they detect that she was pregnant based on buying habits, they were also able to detect the trimester that she was in. So as we create more and more data on Twitter, Facebook, and as we create more computational capability to mine it, we are going to be able to start predicting the outcome of elections, stock market fluctuations, supply chain fluctuations, all sorts of things once we have this data. So from a networking perspective, of course, as you think about the network of tomorrow, the demands on the network in terms of how we optimize it, how we design it, quality of service, the types of traffic flowing across it, and the personality of the network is quite different. The network of yesterday was relatively static. The assets lived in a fixed location, typically for the duration of that asset. Today, assets are mobile. They're in the air. They're 30,000 feet in the air. They're on the ground. They're in the form of cows, trees, and it's a very different network architecture of tomorrow. Now, as we move from sort of the fixed computing paradigm and more to a cloud-based paradigm, I want to talk a little bit about some of the implications of cloud. So it should be no surprise that we're moving more and more towards cloud technology, virtualization, and it's expected within the next decade about a third of all this data that I've talked about will live or pass through the cloud. And often when we talk about cloud, we talk about it in terms of taking applications or services or infrastructure and putting it in the cloud and, in a sense, making it someone else's problem to manage. And that's great. It's very beneficial to organizations. But it also gives us some other tremendous capabilities which I want to touch on. So the first is communication. As you put intelligence in the cloud, it means that relatively unintelligent devices can tap into that. So today, with simply a connection, I can do things like language translation. In the coming years, I will pick up my phone, as long as it has a connection to the network. I will speak whatever language I choose to someone around the world. Now, I'll give you an example. My father lives in China. My mother lives in South Africa. Maybe I call my dad. I speak in English. He hears it in Mandarin. He speaks Mandarin, and I hear it in English. All done in real time because I have a connection to the network. So language translation. Everyone becomes a PhD. As we put more and more intelligence in the cloud, and as we put more and more computational engines that you can query that have open APIs, it means you have access to all the world's knowledge. This has a fundamental implication on how we think about education. The education system is broken. When we think about education, we think about teaching children rote information. Memorize this. Why memorize when it's there for the taking? If you have a connection and all the world's knowledge is there, perhaps we should be thinking about how we educate differently. Perhaps it's not about simply rote memorization, but learning how to learn, learning how to find information, learning how to think. So Wolfram Alpha is one example of a computational knowledge engine. Some of you may remember when IBM's Watson beat Ken Jennings at a game show called Jeopardy. And what's interesting about IBM's Watson, it's a supercomputer, and it understands language. It has linguistic capabilities that rival human capabilities. And what's interesting about this technology, unlike, say, a traditional search engine, is when you ask it a question, you get one result back, and it's always the right result. A very different sort of paradigm. And Watson is now moving into other fields, like the medical field, legal field. So what happens when technologies like this become the first line of healthcare? How does that help you scale some of the challenges that we have with the aging population and so on? And about a year ago, I predicted this capability coming to a smartphone. And in fact, IBM indeed announced a month ago that they're now providing Watson to a smartphone. So those of you that have used Apple Siri have a sense of what you can do with this technology. But what happens when we get this type of supercomputing power to every device, and the device simply has to have a connection. You don't need the computing power in this device, you just need connectivity to the supercomputer in the cloud. So what this means is that the cloud, while it has tremendous benefit in helping to scale infrastructure, applications, and services, it means that it brings supercomputing capability to anyone with a connection. But the inverse is true too. Those that do not have a connection, those that are not connected, are going to be severely disadvantaged going forward. They will not have access to this knowledge. They will not have access to the same levels of education. They will not have access to some of the services that we're talking about. Now let's talk about the network itself a little bit. Sometimes when I do these types of presentations, I talk about all the devices, all the data. The question invariably comes up, well, what about the network itself? Surely you won't be able to handle this demand. Well, by way of example, this is my home network connection in California. I started at Cisco about 22 years ago, and I had a 300 bit per second connection. Not kilobit or megabit, but 300 bit. And that allowed me to have one device connected to the network with arguably a pretty poor green screen kind of experience. Today I have 42 devices in my home that require an always-on network connection. Things like my thermostats. My thermostats check the weather on the internet and then adjust themselves automatically depending on conditions, helps with energy costs. Even my front door lock is connected to the internet. I can unlock my front door from anywhere in the world or lock it. And it's not just the number of devices, it's also the experience that it provides. So I have two boys, I'm married, My family can communicate with my relatives around the world through high-quality video conferencing. We can download any movie ever made. My kids can socialize with their friends anywhere in the world on gaming systems and social networks. It's the experience that it enables. It's not simply the number of devices. But what's significant about this too is my network connection to my home has increased 170,000 times in the last 2 decades. And yet I spend 1/10 of what I spent a decade ago. When I get to a gigabit per second in the next maybe 5 years now, that's a 3 million times increase to my network connection to my home. There are many advances going on from a networking perspective in making the network faster and more capable to accommodate this insatiable demand for content. The IEEE recently began work on terabit Ethernet, so we're going to see the network get very, very fast. Even wireless technology, we're seeing very creative approaches to wireless, using Vortex wireless capabilities. Some American and Israeli researchers demonstrated 2.5 terabits per second over wireless. That's a tremendous speed, and as we see those types of speeds come to mobile devices, think about the collaboration, the communication, the sensing, and the capabilities that we'll have. So a lot of research going on in the core network backbone. You know, Cisco leads the way in terms of some of our backbone products. With products like the CRS-3, everyone in the world could be on a WebEx call at the same time. About 1 billion people can be on a video conference at the same time. With products like the ASR 9000, which is a product at the edge, you could download every movie ever made in 4 minutes. So the core network backbone products are also grown to accommodate this tremendous demand. So the message, of course, is that the networks of tomorrow will absolutely scale to meet our future demands. Now let's talk about some of the implications of some of these trends and what it means. So I could make an argument that human beings advance for one primary reason. It's not solely about our technology and innovation. It's about our ability to communicate with one another. So about 8,000 years ago, when mankind discovered fire, a tribe was able to communicate that knowledge to the next tribe, so the next tribe didn't have to reinvent. When Watson and Crick discovered the DNA double helix, they could pass that knowledge on so other geneticists could build on top of that. We stand on the shoulders of giants. We evolve because we communicate, and the internet is the most powerful communications tool we have ever created. If you consider, say, 200 years ago, to communicate with anyone else on the planet, it would have taken weeks or months, it would have been very difficult. Today we can communicate with millions or billions of people in seconds in rich, immersive ways. High-quality video, for example. Humans are going to start advancing at exponential rates because of our ability to communicate and share and build on top of one another's experiences and discoveries. Just one quick example to illustrate. Many of you recall the recent earthquake and tsunami in Japan. Now what's interesting about this story is that minutes before the government recognized or acknowledged that the earthquake had occurred, citizens were using tools like Twitter to warn family and friends and bring awareness to the plight around the world that the earthquake and the tsunami had occurred. And where I live in California, you know, it's a earthquake-prone geography. And if there's an earthquake, let's say at 3 o'clock in the morning, I can get online onto Twitter at 3:01 and pretty much triangulate where that earthquake occurred because everyone's tweeting about it and everyone's communicating that's going on. So the speed at which we're now communicating through social networks far outstrips the speed of communication of, say, government communication and traditional communication. If you follow this trend out a little bit, and you consider some of the trends I've talked about, the fact that we're going to have 100 megabit or greater to handset devices, the fact that we have movie production studios on these devices that rival those that were used to produce Gone with the Wind, the fact that every television is going to have a network connection. In the coming years, you may very well tune into people, not channels. Someone on the ground could broadcast in real time a world event directly into your home. You may tune into them. Everyone becomes a reporter because of connectivity. So the network is providing unprecedented transparency, and it's a huge, catalyst for change. Now let's talk about technology transparency for a little bit. So for those of you that don't recognize this device, this is a VCR. This is what we used to use to record movies. Now, if you show this to a child today, they won't recognize what this is. And in fact, a child born today will not recognize what a DVD or CD is a few years from now. The reason I put this device up here is to illustrate a point. How many of you had a VCR in your home where the 12 o'clock blinked on and off all day long and you never changed it? Probably most of you, right? Why? Because you had to adapt to the machine. You had to learn how to change the clock. You had to learn how to adapt to the technology. And we've always had to adapt to technology. We've always had to learn how to use a mouse or a new interface or a new UI. That's changing. For the first time ever, because of connectivity, technology is adapting to us on our own terms. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. So the first is image recognition. So machines are learning to see. And I don't mean barcodes or QR codes. I mean learning to see like we see. They're learning to recognize objects and images. In fact, in Japan, at many of the checkout aisles in retail stores, they're starting to use vision cameras to recognize objects you're using to check out. It's hard to put a barcode on an orange, but you can certainly recognize it from a visual perspective. Imagine if you could walk into a retail store and hold up a product to the camera and get information about that product. For example, is it the right product for your home, based on what we know about the other products in your home? Maybe green information, where it's manufactured. Is there anything in that product that you might have allergies towards? To be able to do object recognition, you can take a Google-enabled phone and you can point it at a Sudoku puzzle and it will solve the puzzle for you because of machine vision coupled with intelligence in the cloud. So we're on the cusp of machine vision. And then using your voice to speak. We're seeing a lot of advances in technologies like Siri. But what's interesting about this type of technology is not that it's good at recognizing your voice, but because it's cloud-based. As we put more and more users use this service in the cloud, and as millions of people educate it, it becomes smarter over time. It learns. Augmented reality. We're seeing a lot of augmented reality in healthcare. Imagine a surgeon working on a patient and wearing augmented reality glasses and looking down at that patient and seeing specifically where to cut, or vital signs, or maybe a mechanic working on a car and seeing augmented reality overlaid on the engine saying torque this bolt to such and such pounds per square foot and so on. So being able to use it for education and healthcare and location-based services. And over the coming years, we'll see this technology get more powerful, become geospatial, get embedded into glasses, and ultimately even get embedded into contact lenses. So researchers are already working on contact lenses that double as displays, and researchers are working on devices called biofuel cells that generate electricity from the glucose and oxygen in your blood. So you may very well power contact lenses that are connected to the network that give you augmented reality information powered by your own body. So imagine in a conversation like this, if I were wearing them and I'm looking over the crowd, floating above each one of your heads, I could see information about you. I could do emotion recognition, face recognition. I could show your name above your head, things like that. And even more practically in the coming years, imagine augmented reality over telepresence. So we've got a camera on telepresence. What if we could do facial recognition? Pretty trivial. And now we can look you up in real time, maybe your social network, maybe in a customer database. What products did you buy? How happy are you with the service? Things like that. We can show that information on screen. Perhaps a patient and a physician conversation. The physician could see information about that patient, vital signs. The patient might see information about the physician, where they went to school, their education, their background, those types of things. And then gesture-based computing. Gesture-based computing became fairly mainstream with Microsoft Kinect. And we're seeing more and more of this capability in retail. Now, some of you may not be able to see, we're also showing some videos over there. Feel free to sort of take a look. But so being able to use gesture-based computing in retail to try on different outfits virtually, to be able to gesture through them. We're seeing some of this capability in healthcare now. We're seeing it in the operating room. Perhaps a surgeon has, their hands have blood on them, or they're holding a tool, but they need to bring up patient information. Maybe they use a gesture to bring that information up. So gesture-based computing. And then digital signage and displays that have cameras in them. We're moving away from an era where you simply watch television to where television watches you. And what I mean by that is just like every phone has a camera in it, every television is going to have a camera in it. Every television is going to be connected to the network, of course, to download programming and other things, but also to give you very targeted content. So we're seeing digital signage solutions that with cameras can recognize your age within a couple of years, can recognize your ethnicity, your sex, are you male, are you female, and then start serving up very unique content that's based on who you are. So imagine this in your home. You're watching television, and depending on the brands that you're wearing, what you have in your hand, ads and content that are served up are specific to you, very unique. Or perhaps you have two young children sitting on the couch next to you, so instead of showing some offensive content on the screen, the television recognizes the fact that you have young children with you and adapts its programming style to accommodate what it sees, with you opting in. So not just you watching TV, but TV watching you. And then from an ultimate integration perspective, we're seeing a lot of research and advances in brain-controlled interfaces. And brain implants should be fairly commonplace within the next 2 decades or so, which will allow you to tap into information on the network. But in the short term, we're seeing things like brain-controlled prosthetics. So someone perhaps that has lost a limb, get a replacement prosthetic that they can control using their thought alone. Toyota, for example, has a wheelchair that is controlled by thought alone. So for people that perhaps are paralyzed, they can now navigate around by using their brain alone to do it. So a lot of advances in brain-machine interfaces. So the point to this chapter is that technology is finally adapting to us. Vision, speech, gesture, thought, because of connectivity. Now let's talk a little bit about additive manufacturing. Out of all the trends, this is one trend that I think is pretty transformative, and will have a huge implication on a lot of things that we do, especially around the catalyst for innovation. We're used to going into a store and living in a world that's small, medium, and large. That's about to change. We're on the verge of mass customization at a scale we haven't seen before. We think nothing of going online and downloading a book or a video or music. In the future, we will think nothing about going online and downloading physical goods and having them printed at our location. So today, most of manufacturing, or a large part of manufacturing, is done through a process called subtractive manufacturing, where we take a block of steel, aluminum, what have you, and we machine away the parts that we don't need until we're left with the object that we do. Now with additive manufacturing, we can print things layer by layer by layer until we're left with the object that we care about. And we can print about 40 different types of materials today. I brought a few with me, and you're welcome to come up and look at these after, just to illustrate a few points. So this is a chain. This is just plastic. It could be steel. But the significance of this chain is that it was printed as one piece. It was not printed as separate pieces and then assembled. It came out of the printer like that. This is a chain, and you can do a little more sophisticated things. This is a gear assembly, and it came out of the printer like this, all fully assembled, right? They are now printing fighter plane parts that come out of the printer and go directly into the fighter plane. So although this is a plastic piece, we can also print using precious metals. There's a gold-plated orb here. This is a continuous shape. This is something that you could not manufacture using traditional manufacturing techniques. So it means that we'll be able to manufacture different types of things that we can't do today. So you can look at these, and then this is just a little hand, but this is stainless steel. This is pretty heavy. It weighs a good pound or two. The point is that we can print pretty ruggedized things, and we can start to combine these materials together. So about 40 different types of materials can be printed. Everything from ABS to precious metals to aluminum, steel, and so on. This is a turboprop engine. 10 foot by 10 foot by 10 foot, life-size prototype, and this entire engine was printed. Airbus predicts that by 2050, Airbus makes planes, that they will print entire planes, engine, fuselage, the whole thing, using hangar-sized 3D printers in the next sort of 40 years or so. This was a prototype that was printed. Now this one was printed using 188 parts and then assembled, but the only reason it wasn't printed as one single piece is they simply didn't have a printer big enough. If they had a bigger printer, assembly wasn't even necessary. But the real story about this is not just the fact that they printed it, which is pretty significant, but the cost and time savings associated with this. Had they machined this engine using traditional techniques, it would have cost $900,000 and taken about 9 months. Instead, it cost only $25,000 and took 1.5 months. So consider that. That's a 97% cost savings and an 83% time savings. Think about what that does for the cycles of innovation. I'm spending 3% of what I would have spent on that. How many times can a company innovate now and try new models and try new ideas? What happens when we put a 3D printer in every classroom? What does it do for ingenuity, innovation within the classroom? Very, very different set of opportunities. It means that anyone becomes an innovator. Anyone becomes a manufacturer. And as I mentioned, many different parts can be printed. And in the coming years, we will print electronics. We will print very sophisticated things. And consider this. What happens when we can print a 3D printer using a 3D printer? What are the implications of self-replicating machines? What happens when the first robotic device crawls out of the first 3D machine, 3D printer? You may print your future car. This is a car that was printed a year or so ago. And you may go online, design a car that's appropriate for your size of family, and then have it printed while you wait. You may download your future meal. You may download recipes from the internet and print a meal while you socialize with family and friends. There are devices emerging in the early research stages called computers or chemical computers that allow us to print pharmaceuticals. Think about the implications for healthcare when you can print things down at the molecular level, very customized, very bespoke pharmaceuticals based on the person that's consuming them. Huge implications for weight control, for allergies, for diabetics, for disease. And from the very small to the very big, we're seeing 3D printers emerge that can print at the nanometer level. This is St. Stephen's Cathedral on the left in Vienna. That's 100 nanometers across. That race car there is about 200 nanometers across. And to give you a sense of how small that is, a human hair is about 100 nanometers in size. So that's about the width of a human hair, those two things on the left. And these printers print at about 5 meters per second, so they're pretty fast. And then from the very small to the very large, companies like D-Shape are creating printers that can print homes and large structures. And imagine being able to print your future home. The plumbing, the electrical, the foundation, the walls, that's coming. And they're doing trials of printing homes now. Half of the cost, with tolerances much higher than traditional manufacturing techniques or construction techniques. These are the printers that we will send to the moon and to Mars to create habitats for humanity prior to our arrival. And then what about us? Folks like Dr. Anthony Atala at the Wake Forest Institute for Regenerative Medicine, they're working at designing and creating replacement organs for humans. And today they have produced about 22 types of human tissue, muscle, liver, heart, bladder, and so on. And recently they turned their attention to using 3D printing to print human organs. And recently at a TED conference, and you can see on the video, they demonstrated printing of a human kidney mold. And while it may be a couple of decades before we can routinely print human replacement organs because of trials and testing and what have you, from a proof of principle perspective, we've shown that this is a very viable technique. And I'll touch on aging a little bit towards the end of the presentation. This has huge implications for quality of life and aging and population, as you can imagine. Now, if you don't want to wait a few decades, there's sites like Shapeways today You can go online, you can browse through tens of thousands of objects. If you have a 3D printer, you can download these objects and you can print them in your own home. If you're a designer, you can design objects, upload them, and others can buy your designs. This means that anyone can be an innovator. Anyone can be a manufacturer. You don't have to build a $1 billion fabrication facility anymore. You buy a $1,000 printer. A $1 million printer in 2006, a $1 million 3D printer in 2006, will be less than $1,000 in 2020. That's the price curve of this technology. You know, in 1950, it was a luxury for most people to have a refrigerator in their home. Today we think nothing of having a refrigerator and a dishwasher and a washing machine. We may think nothing of having a 3D printer in our home in the next decade or two. And then we're going to download things over the network and then print them while we sleep. So the message, of course, we will download things as easily as we download music today. Now, some of the challenges that we've got is population is growing pretty exponentially, no surprise. In 1950, there were only about 2 billion of us. We're now just past 7 billion. By 2050, there'll be 9 billion of us. A lot of people. In many fields, healthcare is one example. There are not enough people graduating healthcare to keep up with the demand. That's one problem. We also are creating massive amounts of information that we have to parse and sift through. So we have some challenges ahead of us. We need new tools to augment our own capabilities. So I'll talk about just 2 of those tools. So the first is virtual people. So these are not avatars. These are virtual people that rival our own intelligence. And for those of you that can see the video, this video here is a video of a character, a person, if you will, called Emily. And what's interesting about this is that is not a real person. Okay? That is completely synthetic. You can go online and watch that on YouTube, and I would challenge you to differentiate that from human. You look at it, oh, that's just a video of a person. It's not. It's completely synthetic. Now, what's interesting about this, if you look at the progression of interfaces over the last decade, that's just a 10-year span. And if you take that kind of interface and you couple it with the back-end intelligence I talked about, the back-end intelligence in the cloud, the Watsons of the world, we're starting to create virtual people. Within the next few years, this could be your first-line physician. When you go online and you have an ailment, this is who you talk to. This is the type of entity, if you will, that will help you with first-level healthcare or legal challenges or purchasing or what have you. We'll start to see more and more of these kind of interfaces to help us scale. And the second is the field of robotics. Today, the robotic population is about 19 million. The robot population doubles about every 24 months or so, which means that robotic devices will outnumber humans by about 2030. And as you can see from the video, this is a robot called Big Dog from a company called Boston Dynamics. Very, very sophisticated. This particular one is being used for military applications, but we'll start seeing a lot more in the white-collar workplace. We will work alongside robotic devices. It will be very common for you to work alongside a colleague who is not physically there, but has taken over a robotic avatar body, perhaps in the form of a robotic telepresence solution, so that person can travel without having to physically travel. So robotics. So I'll end with one sort of final chapter, just sort of to leave you with a provocative thought. We're at a very interesting time in human history. We have never had a greater time in human history to innovate and to control who we are and where we're going. We are entering a stage of self-designed evolution. For millions of years, we have been at the mercy of evolution. That's changing. We are rapidly gaining control of our environment, of our world, even down to the atomic and subatomic level. We're beginning to control who we are and what our destinies are. And just some of the very early signals, you know, we are rapidly learning to repair, replace, and augment almost every part of the human body. And some scientists, some futurists believe that children born today are the last of our kind to die. And some scientists have even said that the first person to live to 1,000 has already been born. And it may sound really far-fetched because, you know, we're so used to living to 70, 80, 90. But consider, you know, during the Neanderthal period, the average lifespan for human was 18 years old. During the Middle Ages, the average lifespan for human was 40. Up until 200 years ago, the average lifespan was 50. Today, we have people living to be past 120. So we've more than tripled some lifespans in the last 200 years alone because of medicine, because of environment, because of quality of food. And whether or not we'll live forever is absolutely open for debate. You know, some scientists have taken cells from people that are 100 years and older, and they've reverse engineered the cells back to sort of stem cell level. There are a number of efforts going on, like the Manhattan Beach Project, which you can see online. A Russian entrepreneur started a movement called 2045, and you can check out 2045.com. And they believe that within the next 3 or 4 decades, we should stop the aging process and be able to live indefinitely. Now, whether or not we will, that's absolutely open for debate. But one thing is certain, and that's that people are going to start living a lot longer, right? Which puts a huge burden on society in terms of population, food production, resource depletion. So we need to think about or consider some of these, take some of these things into consideration as we think about, you know, planning, food production, how we use resources, and so on. So let me end with that. The message, of course, is the network is playing a huge role in everything we do going forward. How we communicate, how we share, how we innovate, how we download new things going forward, how we extend our lives, how we provide transparency to one another, to our governments, how we communicate. And today, we estimate that less than 1% of all the things that could be connected are connected. About 2 billion people are connected. What happens when that number is 7 billion? What happens when it's not 1% of everything to be connected, but 10% or 50%? I mean, we've seen a lot already, and the network matters now, but not nearly as much as it will in the future. And we are on an amazing journey. We're just beginning now to kind of see some of the implications of where we're going. So let me end with that, and thank you for your time and attention. Thank you.